We're live. Okay, I'm going to call to order the Policy and Innovation Committee of the Sacramento Area Council of Governments for Monday, August 8th, 2022. Robert, any special instructions?
Well, let me just do some housekeeping announcements. Good morning, everyone. This meeting is being recorded and streamed over the internet. For members of the public, we accept and encourage public comment and have provided options that are listed at the top of this meeting agenda. For our committee members attending in person today, thank you for coming. We're happy to have you. Please note that you have a table microphone in front of you. Do not pick up or move the table mics, as this will result in feedback. You can speak at a normal volume and the mics will transmit the audio through Zoom. Simply hit the button to unmute yourself. Green indicates your mic is live and red means you are muted. For our committee members participating online today, thank you for joining us, and please mute your devices when you're not speaking and use the raise hand feature in Zoom should you wish to comment. Would you like to go to roll call or should we go with the pledge?
Let's, if everybody will stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, let's start with that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. Yeah, would you please call the roll?
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Bernasconi.
Here.
Burris.
Here.
Frericks. Absent. Stollard.
Here.
Vice Chair Middleton.
Here.
Vice Chair Thomas.
Here.
And Chair Kozlowski.
Also here.
We have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. I thank you, everybody, for indulging my work clothes today. I came from a construction site and I'm going back to a construction site as soon as we're done. And if you ask me to take my hat off, you'll see the most hilarious haircut of all time. We start these meetings always off with public communications. If there's anybody that would like to address the committee on topics not on the agenda, this is the opportunity to do so. Do we have any speakers?
No public comment.
Okay, fantastic. All right, then I will entertain discussion or a motion on the consent calendar.
So moved, Stallard.
Second, Bernasconi.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Would you please call the roll?
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Frericks.
Yes.
Stollard.
Yes.
Vice Chair Middleton.
Yes.
Vice Chair Thomas.
Yes.
And Chair Kozlowski.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, please call the first action item.
Okay, we are on item number 5, resolution of intention to amend contract with Calpers, presented by Eric Johnson.
Good morning, members of the committee. This item before you today is a minor contract amendment to our contract with the California Public Employees Retirement System. We have been in contact with Calpers this year about our contract, and the way that we were treating hourly employees is out of compliance with current Calpers law. So this contract amendment would bring us into compliance with that. Under Calpers rules, we're required to take action and not have items on consent when they're amending our contracts, whether it's a small or large item. So this month, we're bringing a resolution of intention to amend. Next month, we'll bring the actual amendment to the contract. So the request today is for approval of this amendment to the contract.
Very good. Board members, any questions? Do we anticipate there being any economic impact to the budget as a result of this change?
No, it's really minor. So this would only take effect. It would cause Calpers membership to be eligible for hourly employees who worked over 1,000 hours in a calendar year. At this time, that's not really how we design our staffing. So most of our full-time or all of our full-time staff are Calpers members. This would just be for seasonal employees, which we don't employ.
Gotcha. Okay. Any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, fantastic. Well, then I'll entertain a motion to accept the intention to amend the contract. So it's kind of a first reading of sorts.
Yeah.
If anybody would like to make that motion.
So moved by Frericks.
Second by Thomas.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. So please call the roll.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Frericks.
Yes.
Stollard.
Yes.
Vice Chair Middleton.
Yes.
Vice Chair Thomas,
Yes.
and Chair Kozlowski.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay.
All right. Brings us to item 6, approve interim general counsel services agreement presented by Eric Johnson.
Again, so this item before you today is to recommend approval of a small contract with the firm of Best and Krieger to serve as interim general counsel for SACOG. As you may remember, in June, this committee recommended releasing RFPs for legal services for SACOG's legal work. Over the summer in July, Kirk Trost, who served as our general counsel, indicated to the executive director that he was going to withdraw from representing SACOG. And so Mr. Maurer with Best and Krieger has been assisting us with the Citizens Initiative, which you'll hear about later on the agenda. And so it's given that we are out to bid for RFP services for general counsel right now, we thought it was best to have an interim general counsel serve this period of transition rather than have a competitive procurement on top of a competitive procurement. Happy to take any questions.
Okay. Board members, any questions about this item? And are you remotely able to hear Eric well enough? Yes. I'm seeing nods.
Yes, we can hear him.
Okay, great. Okay, no questions, board member?
Mr. Chair, I do have one quick question, if that's all right.
Please.
Eric, thanks so much for just a quick update. I appreciate, I think this makes a lot of sense to have this interim contract. Can you just refresh the memory of the committee and myself certainly too, but just the sort of timing on the RFP for the sort of the longer service, and then also just sort of, what the process will be for, and sort of how long we anticipate this sort of interim contract to go before we are likely to be, finalizing a contract with some legal counsel for more permanent role.
Sure, Director Frericks, happy to answer those questions. So we are actually accepting submissions on the RFP through this Friday. Then a committee of staff, James Corliss, our executive director, and Casey on the other deputy executive, and our finance director will be doing our first review of all of those proposals. We then will be having interviews with those shortlisted firms that involve, based on their availability, the chair of this committee, Director Kozlowski, and the vice chairs, Thomas and Middleton, at which point we will then bring back a recommendation to this committee at your August 29th meeting. And our hope is at your September meeting of the full board, the board will be making a recommendation on the selection of the firm or firms to represent SACOG. And just to elaborate a little bit more, we did allow the option for firms to select one or more pieces of the SACOG work. So there may be one firm that is selected for general counsel and others for contracts or employment law or other areas.
Thank you very much. Most appreciated.
And so the contract implementation date, given a September board adoption date, depending on that, we're hoping for around October 1st. The recommendation here is for this contract to last no later than the end of October, just so there's continuity if the contract's not effective exactly on October 1st.
Very good. Board members, any other questions? Okay, well, any public comment?
There's no public comment.
Okay, well, I will just editorialize briefly that I have been delighted to work with Mr. Maurer so far, and having him as our interim general counsel has been really useful. And I'm looking forward to working with him some more in the interim phase here, and looking forward to interviewing candidates for a more permanent role. I will entertain a motion if anybody would like to make one.
Mr. Chair, why don't we consider that your motion, and I'll second your motion.
Fantastic. All right. So we have a motion by Kozlowski and a second by Stollard. Please call the roll.
All right, directors, when I call your name, please indicate your vote. Director Bernasconi,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Frericks,
Yes.
Stollard,
Yes.
Vice Chair Middleton,
Yes.
Vice Chair Thomas,
Yes.
and Chair Kozlowski.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Fantastic. Okay, that gets us to item number 7, which is our first information item, which is an update on the Citizens Transportation Tax Initiative in Sacramento County. I'm sure Eric is going to pinch hit for James because he's got
Yeah.
some cell phone reception issues right now and is out of town. I would just like to say that many of you are aware of the goings on of this particular MOU and how it came to pass. The work that went into it was tremendous. A lot of people weighed in. Some valid concerns were brought up, but I think the result that we landed on was excellent, and it was definitely within the authority that we gave to Mr. Corliss to be able to negotiate the final terms of the agreement with STA and then sign it. So with that kind of preamble, I will turn it over to Eric for this presentation.
Sure, thank you. And I also have a couple slides that James presented the committees on Thursday to just assist with going through this. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Maurer is also on the Zoom call, so he may jump in if there's things that he has to add to this. At the end of June, he joined SACOG to assist with this matter and was really instrumental in getting the MOU that was signed by STA and SACOG leadership to its conclusion. So in May, we brought a staff analysis forward to the board of the proposed citizens initiative. And then in June, the board saw and approved delegation of authority to James to work on an MOU to implement a term sheet that the board signed off on in June. Over the months of June and July, as Chair Kozlowski mentioned, we had the chairs of the 3 policy committees as well as the chair of the board. And then part of that action in June was to have representatives from each of the counties who does not have a committee chair assigned. So actually on this committee, Director Burris from Placer County, and then Directors Bradford and Harris representing Sutter and Yuba counties joined in those discussions. Over the course of the month of July, the MOU was drafted and then it was finalized by the STA board actually 2 weeks ago. And then last week it was signed by all of the parties. One significant change from what was discussed previously what was, I guess, presented in June is that initially it was envisioned that there would be 4 parties to sign the agreement. As it's moved forward, everybody has been involved in those discussions, but the signatories to the agreement are Sacramento Transportation Authority and SACOG, with an acknowledgement by the Citizens for Better Sacramento, or sorry, I forget what the acronym stands for, but the committee, the proponents of the initiative, acknowledging this. So if we can go to the next slide. And this is something that Mr. Maurer and also Casey Lazan, our Deputy Executive for Planning and Programs, can speak to. There is language in the initiative that makes reference to the MTP, but the purpose of the MOU was to further strengthen this and help work on how we implement the proposed initiative should it move forward. And then if you can go to the next slide, the MOU clarifies those sections that were in the initiative as it was written, as to exactly how mitigation would take place. So as I mentioned earlier, the MOU is now between SACOG and STA, and the Committee for Better Sacramento has signed off acknowledging the MOU. What comes next is the ballot language is due to the County of Sacramento in the next number of days. Once that is out there, the commitment as well as part of the term sheet that was approved in June is that SACOG and STA will be issuing public statements acknowledging that we have an MOU that clarifies how mitigation will be taking place. So in terms of the details that are in the MOU on the slide here, just hits a couple of the key points about the analysis and how that will be done. As we talked about in June, if SACOG's analysis is not, if there's a deviation between that and what a third-party analysis concludes, there's a process for meet and confer. So if we can go to the next slide, please. The final implementing step here is working out a timeline and scope for implementation. And so SACOG will be reimbursed for any work it does related to the analysis that is intended to take place should the initiative pass. And so James Corliss has been working very closely with Kevin Busey, the executive director of the Sacramento Transportation Authority, who also just started a matter of weeks ago on the scope as well as the timeline for this. So there are, some details still to be worked out in terms of how this impacts SACOG and the 2024 blueprint timing, and we will be bringing those items back to the board and this committee in future months. And so Mike or Casey, I'm not sure if there's anything else I wanted to add.
Casey, do you have anything else you wanted to add to that? I will add a couple, but just maybe two things. The decision to not have a signature from the Southeast Connector JPA was partly an acknowledgement that having a particular agency who may have a project that is not currently in the MTP could mean actually that if you asked for that signature, you should also be asking for the city of Folsom and the city of Rancho Cordova and the city of Citrus Heights, everybody that potentially may get funding for a project that's not already in the MTP. So it became, to my thinking, a little bit extraneous to insist upon that, and even more might have indicated that this was all an agreement about one particular project when it is not. It is intended to be a process for dealing with projects that are not already in the MTP, and how they will be funded and what mitigation steps are necessary. So that's the one thing. And then the second thing is with regard to some of the choices of language within the MOU, the process of discussing it with STA and their attorneys, and Mike Maurer can weigh in on this, actually helped us to improve some of that language that was in the original term sheet that we concocted and then proposed, so that it is actually more clear. But it did leave behind some elements of the agreement that are intended to be maybe not super strict in their interpretation, so that we can adapt the agreement to the circumstances that we find ourselves in the future. Having an absolute locked down process when you don't know exactly what the projects are that are on the horizon in every instance didn't seem necessary, and the ability to have reasonable people look at things as they come up was part of why some of the language may seem a little less than absolute. So anyway, that's a little editorializing in addition to the presentation. Thank you very much, Eric. Board members, I assume you may have some questions. Tom Stollard.
I thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, I would like to thank all of the members of our SACOG board who labored over what was supposed to be our summer break and before and after to get this done. And I think you've done a fairly good job of making lemonade, if you know what I mean. I noticed in that highlight slide that was just shown, it said STA will follow the SACOG recommendation. I would like our interim counsel, Mr. Maher, to comment. Is that more or less ironclad? As we heard our chair say, it isn't necessarily all ironclad. What is your opinion, please?
Yeah, so that is, and nice to meet all of you, Mike Maurer from BBK. That is one of the issues that we worked through with the negotiations. I think if you remember back to the term sheet, there was an issue where there was a bit of a run-on sentence there. It wasn't really clear how it worked. And so this is really a definitive statement. STA will follow SACOG's recommendation. James had mentioned with the other committees that if there will be two studies, there will be the SACOG study and then a third party. And if there's a deviation, that SACOG's going to meet and confer. And James has described this as, if there's something that SACOG misses or doesn't catch, this is an opportunity to work in good faith and get those resolved. But at the end of the day, it still says STA will follow SACOG's recommendation. And one of the points we wanted to make with that is really to put this into context, what that means. We're going back to the language of the measure itself, which in section K of the expenditure plan, as the slide noted, says that projects to be eligible for initiative funds will have to mitigate their GHG reduction in accordance with the SCS. And when you put that into the proper context, SACOG's the entity that prepares the SCS, that reports those GHG mitigation measures. So ultimately, while this is a collaborative process, at the end of the day, SACOG's the entity that has to justify the mitigation. And so STA will follow, as it says in there, SACOG's recommendation.
Okay, I do have a second question. I think I already know the answer, but I think it's important to have it on the record. And that is, those 26 projects are not currently in the MTP SCS. But we renew this thing every 4 years. So I presume at some point those projects are going to move into the MTP SCS. And because it's a constrained process, both for dollars and emissions, I suspect that has the potential of squeezing out projects which have been in the MTP SCS. Is that not correct?
So I'll have to refer to staff on the last part as to how it affects the existing projects. But the intention here would be that if projects are able to show the mitigation, then they would be able to move into the MTP SCS, and that's specifically called out. What I want to emphasize is that the mitigation is tied to the 19% GHG reduction for the 6-county area. So it's looking at bringing those projects within that 19% as opposed to a total reassessment of how you reach that 19%, if that makes sense. And I don't know if Eric or Casey, if you have anything you're able to add on to that.
Regarding the question of if projects not currently in the MTP SCS are brought into it via this method, the whole point of doing the analysis to determine their greenhouse gas impact is to be able to propose mitigations that, if implemented, would allow those projects to come in and allow the region's MTP SCS to meet the target. So that's my response.
Casey, the idea being that they would have no net effect.
Right, exactly.
So they would come in as a carbon neutral project effectively.
Right, they would, yes, they would be part of this.
Thank you. I hope that's the case.
Yeah. And Tom, with regard to the second part of your question and the squeezing out, I think from a GHG standpoint, the idea is that they wouldn't squeeze anybody out. From an absolute funding question, there's always some calculus about what has match funding that would trigger other funding to be available. So in that regard, some of these projects potentially could have match funding through the sales tax measure that would give them a little bit of a leg up on those that don't have that match funding. But I think that's the thing that all of us as SACOG board members need to be vigilant that we don't let that get good projects that are not in Sacramento County pushed aside. So that's kind of my personal commitment, because I know that is a principal concern of some folks outside of Sacramento County, and I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mike.
Any other board members? Wendy Thomas.
I'd just like to
second Director Stollard's comments and just thank, you and everyone involved, our SACOG staff, on this really difficult situation. And you've done an amazing job, and I think, in finding a compromise. And certainly I appreciate James keeping us all in the loop as this has gone on. And as we know, most compromises that are the best, no one walks away fully happy. And I think that is the measure of a good compromise, which I think you have all done an amazing job in finding that balance. So just want to thank you for your extreme efforts.
Thank you very much. I don't know who Zoom meetings 3 is.
I apologize. We're having some technical issues in the room. The hands are actually not raised in Zoom, but they're raised in the room. So I do apologize for that.
Okay, so Zoom meeting 3 I can disregard.
You can
Okay,
disregard.
Director Stollard, do you have follow-up comments? Your hand is still
His
raised.
hand is actually not raised as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's part of the Zoom glitch right now.
Questions asked. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Questions or comments? Well, I will just close this one up by saying that I agree with you, Wendy. The work that the directors did separate from myself was fantastic, and it was a bit fraught at certain points, but as you said, usually a great agreement. Everybody walks away equally unhappy, so I think we got there. All right, very good. Let's move on to item number 8, Robert.
All right, another info item for us. It is required communication with auditor's statement on auditing standards number 114, presented by Loretta Sue.
Good morning, member of the committees. Staff is wrapping up the financial transactions for the fiscal year 2021-22 and getting ready for the financial audits. Same as previous year, SACOG is required to undergo 2 separate audits by 2 different audit firms. Bailey LLP is responsible for auditing financial statement of SACOG, and Richardson and Company is responsible for auditing the 4 counties local transportation fund and the state transit assistance funds. As required by the auditing standards, SACOG auditors are required to communicate certain matters to those with governance of the agency. In the case of SACOG, it is the Policy and Innovation Committees. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. David Showalter. He is the audit engagement partner from Bailey. He's going to talk a little bit about the planned scope, timing of the interim and year-end field work, and then also the audit approach and any accounting standard that would affect SACOG financial statement for the fiscal year 2021-22. David?
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us this morning to present to you the sort of our introduction to the audit for fiscal year 2022. Annually we go through this process of communicating to you our required communications with the external audit of the financial statements for SACOG. And so I have a few slides that we'll go through with you, and then just open it up for questions. And feel free to ask any questions as we go through the presentation. But really, our audit team that's going to be conducting and working on the audit of the financial statements for SACOG this year. My name is David Showalter. I am the audit partner in charge of the audit. We'll have Kanali Sukasun. She'll be the technical QC audit partner, and Carly Ransom. She'll be returning as the audit senior manager. And then we have our senior audit associate, Michael Heston, and some other folks who will be involved with the audit as well. Carly has been involved with the audit for quite a few years, so she's got a lot of experience working with SACOG on the audit, and so we're pleased to have her returning as the audit manager. So our audit scope is the audit of SACOG's annual comprehensive financial report. So that's the annual financial statements that are prepared by management and include, management's discussion analysis, includes the transmittal letter and statistical section, and that information will ultimately be issued, and then we'll issue our opinion on that information, and then it will also go to GFOA for their award consideration. We're also conducting a single audit over SACOG. So the single audit is the audit of SACOG's federal awards that it receives and assistance. So we audit the expenditures that were incurred during the year and issue a separate report on the compliance over the single audit. We also will assist SACOG with the preparation of the financial statements. And then we'll also, as was mentioned earlier, there is another audit that is being conducted over the LTF and STA funds by Richardson and Associates, and we will be referencing that audit in our audit opinion. So our responsibility is to conduct the audit in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards and government auditing standards. That's kind of a unique combination with governments. Most entities would just require generally accepted auditing standards, but because SACOG is considered a government entity, we also follow government auditing standards as well. We'll express an opinion as to whether the financial statements are fairly presented in all material respects in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. Our audit opinion will provide reasonable but not absolute assurance that the financial statements are free of material misstatement. And our audit doesn't relieve management of its responsibilities with the financial statements. And in our single audit, we'll express an opinion as to SACOG's compliance with each of the major federal programs. In addition, as part of our audit, we gain that understanding of the entity and update our understanding of the entity. So that's all part of our documenting the risk assessment with the audit. So really, when we go through the planning stage and the interim stage of the audit, we're getting that understanding and updating that understanding of SACOG as far as what's happened during the year. What are some of those material financial transactions that might have occurred during the year that are maybe outside of the norm. In addition, just making sure that we have a full understanding of any major changes within the organization that could have a material effect on the financial statements. This year, there's one item that we'll be working through with an implementation of a new accounting pronouncement, which is GASB 87. And this is going to require SACOG to record certain leases on its financial statements that haven't been recorded in the past. So many of you are familiar with things like operating leases, space rent when you're leasing office space, just as the space that SACOG is sitting in right now. That will require some calculation and a liability to be reported on the financial statements this year. So that's a pretty significant accounting standard that's affecting not just government agencies, but every corporate entity in the United States as well. So it's all kind of happening at once for everybody. So we'll be working with SACOG to work through that implementation this year. And obviously that could have a material effect on the financial statements as we work through that implementation. Also our audit is designed to identify those risks of material misstatements related to error or fraud or non-compliance. So our audit procedures are designed to sort of address those risks so that we can mitigate that risk in our audit. And at the conclusion of our audit, we'll issue a separate letter to you that will communicate amongst many of these items on this bullet point, but the qualitative aspects of accounting policies. Again, we'll communicate to you the results of that implementation, that new accounting pronouncement, and what impact it had on the financial statements. Any difficulties we had in the audit, any uncorrected or corrected misstatements, and then any disagreements with management with respect to this year's audit. So our plan, scope, and timing, this month, we are starting the interim phase of the audit and the planning phase. And then next month in September, we'll start the final phase of the audit. So the final phase is where management provides the final numbers, basically the final trial balance. From then we can audit from. So then the planned issuance date will be right around that November timeframe. And then lastly, our approach to the audit for the planning and the risk assessment phase, where we meet with management, we go through, again, update that understanding of SACOG, looking at are there any changes in internal controls with respect to financial reporting, looking for any potential risks that there could be with the financial statements this year. This is also the time where we do our fraud inquiry. We interview various individuals within the organization and ask questions about fraud risks or whether there's been any indication of fraud during the year. We also we'll discuss tote at the top with the executive director, have that opportunity to have that conversation. And then we go through the process of testing internal controls over the various business cycles within SACOG, the revenue cycle, the disbursement cycle, payroll cycle, also getting an understanding of any issues with IT and budget as well. And then we start our single audit preliminary planning, where we identify what those major programs are going to be in the current period. And as we mentioned, this year we'll have GASB 87 implementation this year. So we'll work with management to see where they are with the implementation, and how that's impacting government agencies is basically those types of leases that were considered operating leases. And any of those leases that have a commitment period greater than 1 year would require to be recorded on the balance sheet as a liability with an offset asset, basically a right to use asset. So that's obviously a major change in practice compared to what was done in the previous period, where operating leases were just essentially expensed as you make your lease payment or your rental payment. This is now going to require governments to basically project out the cash flows of that lease all the way up to its term, and discount that lease based on an incremental borrowing rate, and essentially record it on the balance sheet, similar to like a loan, and then amortize that loan over the rental period. So that's a pretty significant impact for a lot of government agencies, especially those that have a lot of equipment that they're leasing as an operating lease, or there's a lot of property that they're leasing. Vehicle leases as well is impacted. Now, this is just for tangible property. Next year in 2023, we'll be implementing a very similar accounting standard, but it'll be addressing software that's basically computing software that might be in the cloud, let's say. That type of software where you're locked into a long-term lease on that software, we will be picking up that liability next year as an accounting standard for 2023.
Hey, David, could I interrupt you for just 1 second and ask a question?
Yes.
Does this affect the way that tax-exempt lease purchases get recorded as well? Or is it just making other leases look more like that, where there's an actual interest component factored into it?
Yeah, this is basically recognizing those long-term commitments that you have when you enter into, let's say, a non-countable lease. And so the accounting standards basically say that's really a liability. If you can't cancel the lease, you're locked in for a 5-year period of time. Not only the GASB, the Government Accounting Standards Board, but the Financial Accounting Standards Board has agreed that that's really a liability that should be reflected on the balance sheet. So all this is really doing is just recognizing that liability, but from the perspective of discounting it using an interest rate factor, discounting it and bringing it onto the balance sheet as a liability. But there is there's an asset that's also on the books. So it's really like you're entering into an agreement to use an office space that's a right to use of an asset. So you're bringing on the asset as well. So that's really the essential method behind this. What that's going to do for a lot of entities that do have a lot of borrowing, it could impact their borrowing capacity. It could impact their rate covenants and other covenants that they have, because they're going to have more debt on their books. So those are certainly things to consider as well. And it could impact your credit rating as well.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so that's pretty much the major accounting standard. And so for this year's audit, again, we'll be starting up the final phase of the audit in September. And then if all things go well this year, we'll be wrapping up that audit in around November. I'm hopeful that things are starting to sort of level out this year compared to prior years with COVID. And certainly we're hoping that we can get things back on track again with the audits. There is one thing that we'll be working with SACOG this year is whether they're the recipient of any rescue plan dollars. I know that the American Rescue Plan, when it was passed, had pushed a lot of funding through FTA and the Department of Transportation. So some of those grants require special auditing and potentially could be considered high risk. So once we receive the draft schedule of expenditures of federal awards, we'll go through that determination to determine what programs are going to be required to be audited. Outside of that, again, GASB 87 is the major implementation this year, and hopefully the audit will go fairly smoothly this year, and look forward to coming back to you at the conclusion to provide you with the results. So any questions or any concerns, anything that,
yeah, board members, any questions? Okay, well, Mr. Showalter, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good work. Okay, last call for commentary. All right, great. Let's move on to item number 9.
Number 9 is Community Economic Resilience Fund update presented by Clint Holson.
Good morning. Just a brief update for you today. It's been a while since you've heard about this program. I think it was right around the beginning of the calendar year that Evan Schmidt, the CEO of Valley Vision, came and talked about this funding opportunity. So this is the Community Economic Resilience Fund. It's a one-time competitive program that the state is putting on around, well, it's using general fund money. It was originally funded by the by some economic recovery funds from the federal government. But this program is really designed to, the purpose of the program is stated as planning and implementation activities around inclusive and low carbon economic growth strategies. So for our region, this is really a continuation of the work we started in 2018 with the Brookings Institution that came and did a kind of an economic assessment of our region. That was then followed by the economic prosperity strategy that we partnered with the Prosperity Partnership. So that's a partnership with us, with GSAC, Valley Vision, the Sacramento Metro Chamber, and the Cal Asian Chamber. That program or that plan was adopted or finished and released in 2020. And then coming on the heels of that, this SURF program was developed. I think it's $600 million statewide. The first round of applications, their planning applications, kind of phase 1, is $5 million per region. The Sacramento region, it's largely consistent with the SACOG region, with the addition of Colusa and Nevada counties. Valley Vision is serving as the lead applicant for this. They'll be the fiscal agent and responsible for kind of doling the funding out. We should hear back on the $5 million. While it's a competitive program, it seems like all signs indicate that if you are applying for it and you are meeting the eligibility requirements, at least of the planning phase, you'll get that $5 million. We should hear by October. They're trying to get that program out and rolling because they're finishing up the guidance for the implementation phase, which is the next phase of this. And that will be designed to fund any of the implementation activities that come out of the planning phase. So we'll want to get started on that planning phase quickly so that we can get into that implementation phase and get the full ask for implementing the strategies that come out of that. In the attachments, you'll see kind of an executive summary of what Valley Vision applied for. There's not a lot of scope details there yet, and that's on purpose because we're trying to take a very collaborative approach to developing these sub-geographies that you'll see outlined in the executive summary to tailor what we do, the strategies and then the implementation steps to each of those sub-geographies. But really it's about implementing the goals out of our regional prosperity strategy. There's also the economic development strategy for Yuba and Sutter. Taha has one as well. So this is going to bring together all of those plans and try to come up with some tangible actions for next steps. And $5 million is a pretty decent amount to do some collaborative planning followed by these implementation funds. So with that, it's just a quick update to let you know where that program is and that we got the application in at the end of July. Should hear back and hopefully start work here in October. And we'll definitely be providing more updates as that work progresses to this committee. I can take any questions I can try to answer here.
Board members, any questions for Mr. Holson? Lucas? Mr. Frere, Director Frere, excuse me.
Thanks. Not a problem. Thanks. Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Clint, just thanks for the update. Appreciate it. I do have one quick question, which is, I recognize that sort of Valley Vision, sort of on behalf of a variety of agencies, sort of leading this effort in the region. Was that application by Valley Vision the only submittal from Sacramento region, though? I had heard in advance that there might be another, and that it's unfortunate if there are multiple. I feel like it's pretty unfortunate that there might be multiple sort of entities trying to vie for limited dollars, when it seemed like most organizations and agencies were supportive of the Valley Vision approach, so and having them sort of lead the effort. So I'm curious about that and what kind of prospects that might have, and say COG or the Sacramento region getting its share of the dollars.
I will confirm this, but my understanding is that there was an intent of another organization to apply, but that application ended up being set aside and they got absorbed into the larger regional application that Valley Vision is leading. So that's my understanding. There was a letter of intent, I think, initially, or a pre-application initially beginning development, but Valley Vision was able to reach out and kind of sort through where there were any differences and then bring that effort on board. I will confirm that, though, just to make sure that my understanding is still the most up to date.
Oh, thanks very much. I appreciate it. It seems like having one application from the region is probably the way to go, anyway, as opposed to just trying to sort of compete within multiple applications from the same region.
Yeah.
Great. Director Stallard, is your hand frozen up, or do you have comments?
My hand must be frozen up because I don't recall raising it.
Okay.
It's not showing as raised on my screen. But, I do have a question. We have a potential for $5 million for each jurisdiction. That's what you're saying, Clint?
Sorry, $5 million is the total for the 8-county region. So it's a $5 million single regional ask. It includes all of those 8 counties.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, it's still a significant amount of money, but
yeah.
I thought you said for all jurisdictions.
Oh, sorry if I misspoke. Yeah, one big $5 million request.
Thank you. Well, this is great. And I love the fact that Valley Vision is providing a role here too. That's good for all of us. Thank you.
Director Thomas?
My hand must be frozen up too, because I didn't raise it.
Okay, great.
Thank
all
you.
Right. Well, I have one just real quick question for you, Clint. You mentioned the Yuba Sutter project. That one seems like a very promising use of this funds. Could you just back over what the I guess the goals of that is? What they hope to achieve there?
Are you referring to the Yuba Sutter, their economic development plan?
Yeah. Yes.
I don't know too much about it, but I do know that that Yuba Sutter is being set up as kind of a sub-geography within the 8-county planning area.
Right. With
the intention of focusing on kind of some of the agricultural and industry sectors up in those 2 counties. Gotcha. So they're kind of being treated as a little bit of a separate sub-geography, still part of the SACOG region, still will be coordinated with the regional effort, but probably go through a slightly separate process to develop kind of their own implementation strategies or custom implementation strategies.
Okay. All right, great. As we go forward, I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Absolutely.
It's an interesting topic and a little bit different than how we may approach it other places. Okay. Any other final comments or questions from the board? All right, fantastic. We'll look forward to further results. Robert, you want to call number 10?
Yeah. Item 10, the advocacy update presented by Sabrina Bradbury.
Good morning, committee members. So a few updates for you. First, on the federal advocacy side, I wanted to call out attachment A that summarizes the appropriations bill that recently passed out of the House and some other federal activities. And just wanted to note that on the appropriations bill, the Senate still needs to release their bills and top line numbers, and those need to be agreed upon for this to become law. So there are some earmarks that are noted on that attachment that would come to our region, but that is just what has passed out of the House. Those would still need to be agreed upon by the Senate, and we're likely to see some reduction in the total amount of that fiscal year 2023 appropriations bill. Much of our other work on federal advocacy has focused on advocating for our RAISE grant application and coordinating with EDCTC and PCTPA on encouraging partnerships and from our members and others in the region to apply to grant programs like the Safe Streets and Roads for All and reconnecting communities. So those grant programs are also noted in that attachment. On the RAISE grant advocacy, thank you to all of you who have contacted USDOT and helped show support for that grant. We've also had some congressional members who have reached out to USDOT, as well as some local partners like Civic Thread who have called as well. And so we've been told we might hear as early as next week what those awards are. So we'll keep you posted on when that's announced. And then on the coordination with EDCTC and PCTPA, just wanted to thank our partners there working together to get ongoing email communications out that let folks know about the notices of funding opportunity as they come out, and offering technical assistance, letters of support, grant consultation sessions, as any resources that members and partners might find helpful in getting those applications drafted. And then finally, on the federal side, I wanted to note that yesterday the Senate passed a reconciliation bill that includes $370 billion to reduce greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below the 2005 levels by 2030. This is the most significant piece of climate legislation that has passed in the US. So I wanted to call that out, even though we're still working with our federal lobbyists to analyze everything that's in there. It does take an incentives-based approach that includes a number of subsidies for encouraging people to buy electric vehicles, installation of charging, and incentives for the energy sector to shift to more clean forms of energy like solar and wind. So these are investments that, while won't necessarily come directly through SACOG, they will help us in achieving our regional goals around greenhouse gas reductions. On the state legislative side, since we last met in June, the state budget did go into effect. So we've summarized those allocations there. We focused our advocacy efforts on trying to secure more funding for infrastructure investments to accelerate infill in green zones. And while we were not successful in getting an increase to the infill infrastructure grant program or any changes to that program, we did build a statewide coalition of environmental and housing organizations that I know will help us in future years advocating for these investments. And like I said, there's some highlights for allocations to transportation, housing, and climate in that state budget in the staff memo. On SB 375 related legislation, I just wanted to call out that there is one bill, AB 2438, a Friedman bill, that is still moving through the legislature. The other two bills that we had been tracking did not move forward and will not move forward for this legislative calendar, but we're continuing to track 2438. It focuses on requiring state agencies to align funding guidelines with state climate goals. So we'll monitor that and engage on that bill. And then in May, you may recall that I gave an overview of a couple different reports, the AB 285 report and the SB 150 report. We submitted comment letters on those, and you'll find those in attachments C and D. And then since that time, the state has also released the draft scoping plan. And while the draft scoping plan does not specifically assess progress on SB 375 implementation, it does assess progress toward meeting the state's overall greenhouse gas reduction goals, and therefore is related to our work. We didn't submit a comment letter on that report, but we are engaging in discussions through work sessions, and we'll keep you informed as that report gets finalized. We know that these reports are going to continue to spur interest in SB 375 related legislation, so we are also working with CalCog and other MPOs to meet and discuss what legislation we might want to see and suggest to the legislature. And the legislature just reconvened last week from recess, and this week is the suspense file deadline, so we'll have more information after that about which bills will move forward. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions you might have.
I have one question, and that's with regard to the green infrastructure GHG federal bill that was passed out recently. I'm sure you do not have the answer to my question, but I would be interested to hear back at some point on what, if anything, there's in there for regional, or in our case, mega regional planning of EV charging infrastructure, because one of the topics we have talked about with the mega regional work group was trying to fit together a mega region plan for Northern California, or our 20 counties or whatever it is, where over the road trucks, particularly, that charging infrastructure might be something that's better handled on a regional basis than hodgepodge here and there. So I'd be interested to know if there's funding for studying that or implementing any of that we could try and capture as SACOG or the mega region.
Well, I don't know if Eric has any info on that specifically, but I made a note to dig into that.
Yeah, that's more a homework assignment than a question for today. That's something of interest to me personally on the mega region group.
I know that and perhaps this is what you're referring to, or I know regionally we have an EV strategy with the Air District, SMUD, and SAC-RT. And so I'm sure we're connecting that to the mega region work as well, but I'll find out on the what we have in terms of funding resources to those efforts.
Excellent. Board members, any other questions for Sabrina? Jump in, because the hands are not working perfectly if you have anything.
I'll go ahead and tell you if the hands raised, but there are no hands raised at the moment.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, thank you very much for that update, and we will look forward to more good news. On to number 11.
All right, item 11, Race, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group Meeting Report Out, presented by Casey.
Yes, good morning. We had a meeting of the Race, Equity, Inclusion Working Group of the board on July 29th. And the primary objective of that meeting was for the working group to give input on the Blueprint Public Engagement Plan to help that engagement to prioritize racial equity. And then also to get the working group's feedback on a draft racial equity action plan. Both of those documents that they reviewed are included in your item. The entire packet is attached to this item. So it was a very, very productive meeting. We had great feedback from all of the working group members who were there. I will, as I give you the recap here, any board members who are on the working group who may want to jump in are welcome to. I think your perspective would be wonderful. What I want to do is, in order to give some context to the feedback we received, just give a little bit of process of how we got to that point. So your board in February now adopted a racial equity statement. And within that statement were several commitments that SACOG said we would follow through in order to follow through on this statement of change. And so from that point forward, what SACOG staff did was began a listen and learning phase of developing a racial equity action plan. So from March through June, we hired a racial equity consultant to help us both with the listening sessions as well as be our on-the-job trainer in doing this work, since SACOG has never done a racial equity action plan. They conducted listening sessions with a number of stakeholders in the regions. We invited all of our city and county staffs through their city manager or county executive. We did listening sessions with all of SACOG staff, including management. We did listening sessions with transit agency staff, all of our transit partners, with community-based organizations, and with our prosperity partnership, which is the organizations actually that Clint just talked about for the SURF item, Valley Vision, Metro Chamber, Asian Chamber, and GSAC. And so 14 total sessions were held with 83 attendees over that time period. And then during the same time, we had one-on-one interviews offered to all of the REI working group members. So there are 20 members, 14 of them raised their hand to do these one-on-one sessions. And so we were asking for input from them on what SACOG should focus on in developing a racial equity action plan. So with all of that information, and with a series of trainings with our racial equity consultant, we developed the first draft of this racial equity action plan. So it is as best to our ability, what it reflects is literally the input we received. And that racial equity action plan is developed or is broken into 3 areas. There are 3 goals regarding SACOG's operations. There are 3 goals regarding SACOG's programs, and then there is one that is, there are 3 goals focused on board practices. It's a coincidence there are 3. I'm realizing there's like some symmetry in that. And so what you will see in this racial equity action plan is that we have these goals and objectives written out, but you'll notice that everything that's below that, the actions, the timelines, the indicators, those are not detailed out yet. We kind of cut it off at the point where we were going to send it to the working group so that they could take it, give us feedback on it. And so what we were asking for is really for them to focus on the goals and objectives. So which goals and objectives are they excited about? Which ones they think are going to be challenging or controversial? What is missing here? What would they prioritize? And what I would like to do is go through the highlights that they gave to us in this session here. So, and I'm going to go, I hope you'll bear with me. We haven't totally synthesized this yet. It will be going as receive and file to the board, but these are the notes that we have. So firstly, there's under operations, there's actually a lot of excitement from working group members about training for member agencies. Both for SACOG, but also what SACOG might therefore be able to provide to member agencies as far as engaging with historically underrepresented or underserved communities.
Member agencies, meaning the
cities and
counties that make up our membership?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, thank you. Okay. There was also a request when it comes to training opportunities. A lot of the operations is focused, of course, on SACOG staff training, but that when we talk about standardizing training opportunities, to really be careful to think about that sometimes standardizing opportunities is not actually an equity approach, because some people who are trained may not be up to the level that others are who are going through training. So that is something we appreciate, because we will have to think through how we will implement that. An interest also that we would, when it comes to procurement, that can we think about how in our requirements for contracts that we can have companies try to encourage in some way companies to that work with us to have an equity plan. So how can we demonstrate through our procurement policies what we are seeking as far as our equity goals? Of course, there are lots of existing state and federal rules that we would have to navigate with that. And so that was flagged for us, which we also appreciate. When it came to programs, there's a lot of excitement and interest to make sure that in one of our goals, we have touching on history, like what historically has happened. So how did we get to where we are at in the region? And so an interest to have that incorporated into our programs. And there's a lot you'll see throughout operations, programs, and board practices, a lot of focus on education, which makes a lot of sense for this as our first time. Education, as well as education on listening and learning, on just trying to do a better job of engaging with all stakeholders in order to do our work. And so that was something that was hit on as very important and exciting to the members. The other thing that was very exciting to working group members was in programs, one of our goals, we say that we want to work with member agencies. So this is both to learn with them and also to provide services with them. So services to them. There was this interest in SACOG providing training. However, all of our member cities and counties, including our transit agencies, actually, I'll include our partner agencies, we're at all different levels of the type of this type of work. And so with that acknowledgement, we want to, as a council of governments, be able to provide training, but also to provide a learning community for all of those members so that we can learn together. And so that's what goal 2 is primarily focused on. Actually, the goal 3. It's goal 3 in programs. There was a lot of interest in that. On board practices, a lot of excitement around an internal study mission. There's a lot of interest in, again, history, ensuring that the board has time to learn and discuss our history in this region, and also in the activity of onboarding new board members, so that anyone who comes onto the board for the first time gets brought up to speed on what are we doing on this topic of racial equity. And then lastly, and there was quite a bit of conversation around the first goal under board practices, which is deepening the board's understanding of deepening its understanding of how race, ethnicity, income, and geography affects the social outcomes of communities throughout the Sacramento region. All of the activities within that, there was excitement about that. I think a lot of it was this interest in having time to better understand our communities. That's almost a verbatim quote out of the working group member comments. And that is my summary. You got it raw from my notes there. I will be summarizing those to, as I said, to include in the August board packet. The next steps, if I may, and then I'm happy to take questions and hear other comments. The next steps this month, we've sent this out to all of the stakeholders who were invited to listening sessions. So we are inviting their feedback on this, meeting with us, emails, calls, whatever. We are trying to take all of that through August. And then we are going to be bringing this as an info item to all 3 of the board committees. So we'll walk through each of the goal and objective areas to be able to get both for the board members in those committees to get an understanding of what's in the draft plan, give their feedback on it, and also any feedback that we've gotten so far, we'll bring that to them so that they can get up to speed as well. Then our goal is in September to finalize this, bring it to the REI group's September 30th meeting for them to finalize, and then bring it forth to the Policy and Innovation Committee to forward onto the board for adoption in October. That is our goal.
Okay, I have several hundred questions, but I'm going
Yes.
to go to the other board members first. I'm going to pick my favorite 2 questions, I think. Anybody, directors, any questions, comments, suggestions, endorsements?
Casey gave a good summary of what occurred at the last discussion. Appreciate it.
All right. I absolutely was not there for that session, so I have a few questions. With regard to the idea of training, did you parse out the delivery of training as in developing classes or some sort of delivery method from the educational outcomes that you desire? Because there's a whole nother topic, which is what knowledge do you hope to get standardized across the region? And is the best use of SACOG's time developing that set of knowledge goals, or how to educate everybody on those things? So that's one. Another is, are we keeping an eye on the ball that we are trying to relate this back to SACOG's regular mission of providing funding for transportation projects, and how these things affect that thought process and selection process? And then if you're entertaining the idea of providing training, what is the incentive for cities or counties to engage in doing that? And how will we fund the ability to actually create those programs and deliver them? And maybe we're not there yet, but those are some questions that I would ask based on your presentation today so far.
Yes, they're excellent questions. They're spot on.
Okay.
If I may, my answers are going to be in progress answers.
Sure,
right.
Sure.
But this is good. This is very helpful, because we are literally in this place of trying to take it to the next step of detailing out. So if I look to, I'm going to look to one of our program objectives under the goal of SACOG supporting and learning from member and local partner agencies to incorporate racial equity best practices into their planning work. So the goal is incorporating best practices into our planning work. So it's not about, in this case, when we talk about planning, it's planning is an activity that we and our member and our partner agencies all do. So the idea is that we are doing it, we're shifting the way that we do that. So one of the objectives is to collaborate with local and partner agencies to develop shared learning and skill building opportunities through some periodic training and convenings to increase our impact in the community. So the actions that might then transpire from that are, first we meet, so when we say we convene them, because we need to understand where all of those, first, who are the interested member and partner agencies, and then work with that group to define what is it that we are trying to get better at doing. When I take planning work in particular, a lot of the theme that came out of the listening sessions, both with REI working group members and then also with stakeholders, is community engagement, which is a term that we hear a lot and it can feel like a fluffy thing. But when it comes to equity, what we are hearing, and we are trying very hard to then internalize it, is we need to try in a different way to engage with community members to we hear meet them where they're at, and it depends. You have to use different tactics, right, to meet different members of our community. We need to do better to reach out to them, to engage with them, and to then actually include their voices into the planning work versus and inform to them, consult to them, and then we kind of go off and create something and then bring it forth for your adoption. So how do we better actually engage with the community at all levels of government, right? Cities, counties, transit agencies, and SACOG. So that's one example of something that we're trying to think through, and what does that training opportunity look like? There are, though, a number of, this isn't actually,
Who's your first training target, I guess? How about that? Because I could imagine that there is a desire for people to understand a whole series of topics while they are making choices about what projects to put forward, how to design those projects, what impacts they may or may not have on things. So I could imagine that, you know, convening the city managers and planning directors of the region would be one layer of that, right? But then, you know, like the city of Folsom, you know, we have at least a dozen people that work in our planning department or building department that have some role in making choices about where things go and how they get designed and, you know, what's on what corner, that kind of stuff for transportation projects. And then there's the development community that ends up by way of, you know, development fees and their own input participating in the design of those things. So, and then that becomes this balloon of, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that are participating in those things.
Yeah.
And then there's our board, obviously. So there's a whole like series of different things. So what's, you know, what do you imagine is the most impactful first step on this, you know, training or education mission?
that is part, well, two answers. None of them are going to probably be fully satisfactory. That is in part what we are going to our stakeholders to ask. So to the working group members, we're asking them, you know, which of these goals and objectives should we be prioritizing? Because what we're talking about right now is one set of objectives for one goal, but there's a host of other, right? There's all of the operations, there's all of the board, there's the rest of the programs. And so which of these do we need to prioritize within like the first year? Is it that training opportunity? Maybe, but I don't know, like, you know, part of why we have operations goals first is because we also heard we need to get our own house in order. And so there's a lot on just general, you know, equity practices and like hiring, procurement, you know, all of that. And so maybe that is what we will be focusing on first before we turn to, you know, focusing on all of our external partners. But another answer, sorry, you can totally jump in a second, but another thing that we have already started doing is the board in the last regional funding round, you created the Engage, Empower, Implement program. And this is a planning program that's specifically to try to work for local jurisdictions to co-create a project with their community members. So there's a lot that we are going to learn from that. The cohorts, you know, that end up going through this first round will be really going through their own training.
I love that idea and have low expectations because the ability to get I don't know how to say this perfectly diplomatically. It took me close to 4 years to understand how funding comes into our region for transportation projects. Getting somebody up to speed on all of the ins and outs of those things in a short time so that you can have a meaningful give and take about adopting equity practices within those constraints is a massive challenge that I see on the horizon. So anyway, that's editorial there. Okay, very good. Eric, did you have something?
I was just going to offer on the training. Yeah, as Casey said, we don't know exactly how this is going to look, but I think, you know, from speaking from the operations standpoint, like if we look into the training that's needed, you know, all the decisions don't happen at SACOG, right? And so I think it's following that thread to say, okay, rather than SACOG getting to this level of advanced training that is unsatisfactory to stakeholders and to jurisdictions because we're saying this wasn't adequate public engagement. Like we need to figure out what are the steps we can do to help improve what is happening at SACOG. So certainly narrowing the scope a little bit, but yeah,
starting here makes good sense. Okay, excellent. All right, board members, any other questions or comment on this topic? Thank you, everybody that's involved in Race, Equity, and Inclusion Committee or subcommittee. It's proving to be a complicated, interesting expedition, but absolutely worthwhile. Okay, All right, thank you very much, Casey.
All right, thank you.
All right, we are to our final regular item, number 12.
All right, item 12 is SACOG strategic planning update presented by Eric this morning, I believe.
Yeah, so I'm also stepping in for James on this one. So on Thursday, we brought this item to both of the committees as well. So we wanted to bring this in front of all committees. Let me start and give a little bit of background before we jump into the vision and mission statements that you see on your screens. So SACOG does have an adopted strategic plan. It was adopted in 2010, so it is quite old, I would say, by any definition right now. And so since James started about 5 years ago, we've been taking small but incremental steps to moving towards what we hope to do by the end of the
Not sure about it for everyone else, but the boardroom went on mute. So now we can hear you again, but it was on mute for
okay.
the last
All right.
30 seconds or something.
Okay. I'll try to just like recap what you might have missed in the last 30 seconds. Strategic plan adopted in 2010, well overdue for a new strategic plan. So we've done 3 board retreats over the last several years since James arrived. And as some of you may recall, we have Daniel Kaufman with the firm of Third Plateau, who has facilitated those retreats. And in addition to facilitating our April retreat with the board, he also did interviews with the majority of the board members, over 20 board members, to get a sense of kind of where the board is at and what you'd like to see out of SACOG. And so through that work, he has assisted us in the last couple of months of coming up with a draft vision statement, as well as a couple of options for draft mission statements. And so this item, officially is in the scope of the Strategic Planning Committee, which is also meeting on August 29th, your next meeting date. But given the breadth of it, we wanted to kind of informally workshop this at all 3 committees to see any thoughts on this. Or, how are we heading in this? It'll go to the Strategic Planning Committee for some further refinement, and then hopefully go to the full board for adoption in October. And so just to round this out, this, as with all strategic planning documents, this is kind of the top line vision and mission. There are other pieces implementing this that we will also be bringing forward to the full board to kind of flesh out, what does this mean? Like, how does this focus and target our work and what we prioritize? But, starting with a vision and mission statement that is understandable and clear is a really important, kind of first principles approach. So with that, wanted to just open up reactions to the vision statement. Any comments or feedback you have on, does that capture what we're hoping to do as an organization? And again, vision and mission, just real quickly, as our consultant has defined them, a vision is what you're aiming to contribute towards. A mission is what you do, right? And so the vision may be larger than the scope of what SACOG's doing, but is in service of this larger vision.
Okay, board members, I think we should probably leave these 3 on the screen. So you're going to have to speak up to comment, but I can kind of mentally go through the list. Director Frericks, did you have any thoughts about these 3 options that you'd like to share with the group?
Honestly, still just sort of, digesting the 3 of them, and we'll, just sort of really thinking about each, I would say that just generally, one quick comment overall, which is just that, but whether it's vision or mission previously, like, I don't think it was very wordy previously. And I don't think anybody could have easily identified or sort of recited either of them in sort of the previous version. So I'm really appreciative that we're sort of going through this process. I think it's needed. And I will definitely, I'm thinking about each of the 3 options right now. Have more thoughts fit. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree with you that succinct is way better in these kind of expeditions. So Director Thomas Middleton and I got a little preview of this last week. And I think Director Thomas, if you're there,
I am. Yes.
The kind of the discussion we had about using the word growth, I think
Yes,
might be something that you'd be good to comment on.
I'd love to jump in here, and I appreciated the lunch this last week and getting a preview of this. My comment to this was I liked option one in terms of the mission statement, in terms of the role of SACOG to convene and connect. And I think there was a lot of discussion that is, you know, the core function, that the sweet spot of SACOG, and that does so well in connecting the larger region. And I'll let you, Mike, speak to the equitable, sustainable, and prosperous. I thought your comments around that were very interesting, but I focused on growth. I think growth has a different connotation with each of our regions, whereas growth may be sought at, you know, in more urban regions. The term growth can send some rural regions and rural residents running for the hills, literally. So I was in favor of a combined mission statement with 1 and 2, saying SACOG convenes and connects the region in service of equitable, sustainable, and prosperous. I'm sorry, let me back up. SACOG convenes and connects the region to advance an equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future. And I think that kind of gets to the heart of a shared vision that most of our region can rally around. So those were my thoughts. So thank you, Chair.
Excellent. Yeah. Swapping future for growth is a positive change, I think, just in terms of messaging. And my comment, and thank you for reminding me of that, Director Thomas, the comment I made about sustainable and equitable was simply that those words have some important currency at this moment in time. And they're probably appropriate to be here, and they are, you know, part of our mission, certainly, but that we're going to need to probably revisit this mission periodically so that we don't allow it to become stale, or for it to be, oh gosh, I guess they wrote this back in 2022 kind of, you know, reactions from people. So I think it was more just about, this is doing it every 10 years is probably not often enough, you know, because the board changes over and the staff changes over somewhat, and we need to keep refreshing that. So I absolutely agree with Director Thomas that a combination of 1 and 2 by advancing equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future rather than in service of equitable, sustainable, prosperous growth is a subtle but important change, potentially.
Chair Kozlowski, Director Burris does have her hand raised.
Excellent. Director Burris, please jump in.
Thank you. So this might seem like a very small, minute point, but one of the things I really like about option 1 is that the specific use of the words SACOG convenes, in contrast to the other 3 statements, I think brings more personal ownership over the fact that we are SACOG. SACOG is not a separate entity that, you know, we can separate ourselves from. And I think that's really important when we're talking about the mission statement, that we're all part of this. It's not a separate entity that's dragging us along.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I agree with you. That is principally why I liked option number 1, is convenes and connects is an excellent turn of phrase. Director Stollard, anything to add?
I just want to weigh in. Interestingly, my favorite one initially was option 3, because I love the concept of leveraging the regional vantage point and cross jurisdictional relationships. Although I think that's kind of highfalutin talk. And so I can live without it, but I think we need to be thinking that's what we do. By coming together, we leverage, and that's a good thing. So I like everything I've heard, and I'm happy with the amalgam of 1 and 2, replacing the word growth with future. Thank you.
Excellent. Director or Vice Chair Middleton, anything to add here?
It looks like she may have dropped off.
Okay. And Director Bernasconi, any comment or endorsement, suggestions?
No comment. I appreciate the conversation.
Excellent. All right. Did I overlook anybody because I cannot see you all on the Brady Bunch tiles here?
He does a really good job as chair.
Nobody has their hands raised out there.
Okay, all right. Last chance if any other directors want to throw 2 more cents on the pot.
I can run.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for your comments. Hopefully that gives you guys some additional direction as we go forward.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to our last item on the agenda, which is receive and file. So we shall receive and file item number 13. Any other matters from the staff that should be discussed?
No other matters for today, except for just reminding everyone again, our September meeting happens on August 29th due to Labor Day. So we'll see you again this month after the board meeting.
Fantastic. Board members, any final words of wisdom for the good of the order?
I have no problem with your cap, Mr. Chair, but that shirt, that skull on the shirt makes me nervous.
Oh, yeah, this is a concert t-shirt for the 80s punk band X. You should look them up on YouTube. They're excellent. All right, well, hearing no other matters to discuss today, I will adjourn our meeting and see everybody on Monday, August 29th. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much, everyone.